Olá a todos, bem-vindos à 06ª DevTalk, a última DevTalk desta primeira temporada. O convidado de hoje é o Gonçalo Veiga, que nos vem falar sobre UX. Gonçalo.
Do you mind if I do this in English?
No.
Please, not at all. Hello, guys. So, Antonio reached out a few weeks ago about talking a bit about UX. So there's a lot of mysticism around UX and how hard it is, and sometimes also something a bit hard to understand. So I'm here today to kind of demystify the topic and also to share a few practical guidelines on how can anyone, including developers, improve on the user experience, create like already a good enough baseline, and at which point would you benefit of actually getting UXers or UX researcher and UX designers in the team to take it further? Yeah. Tony, do you want to go for the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, guys. So I'd invite you guys to make this as interactive as possible. So share questions, and I'll be happy to discuss. So do reach out, also especially if you disagree, which will always be interesting. Yeah, that's it. So without going further along, let me introduce myself. So I actually in engineering training, so I'm trained in computer science, later in management. I started off as a developer and developer teams manager. And in the last 12 years, I kind of shifted to the user experience. I kind of rediscovered myself and the interests I had, and I made a shift in career. And that happened essentially at OutSystems, where I had the opportunity to basically set up the whole UX services area and later jump to product. And the last, until the end of last year, the last 5-6 years, I was basically ramping up the UX capabilities of product at OutSystems. Currently, I'm heading Experience and FinTechOS, so kind of a change in scenario. Really focused on the startup product, changing the product every day. So a different kind of reality. So here's my contact, LinkedIn and Twitter. Feel free to reach out. And this is a bit about me professionally. So what about the non-work part? So I'm happily married with 2 kids. One of them is annoyingly taller than me already. And what I do as a hobby is basically I just drive these people around. So I drive my kids to social events. I also kind of like stroll around with the team through the weekends, and kind of like that fulfills me. But as I spend a lot of time driving, I try to kind of also do it a bit in style and get something out of it. So I decided to buy a Tesla. And why is this interesting? Well, the Tesla is a very particular car. For example, it has a set of quirks and problems that things don't work or that's not really there. But the thing is, these guys are really pushing the envelope. They're innovating every day. And basically, when you're doing this, there's always something that's escaping us. But when you drive a Tesla, you feel like you're in the future. Yeah, and that's the really amazing part. And one of the things which is more relevant here is that there's a whole way that engineering and designers are working, and every piece of technology here is created to basically push the customer experience forward. And it's really a revel to experience and to be within that. So they're innovating relentlessly. For example, Elon Musk said that when he was being challenged around like the stocks going down and stuff like that, he said, well, if you buy stocks of companies which are continuously innovating, basically in the long run, they'll always win. And this was a few years back, and this is where he is. So the main message here is how can we really develop and leverage technology to the benefit of our users and customers? And this will drive us to heights that we haven't seen. Yeah. So usually it's not easy. So whenever we need to work on the user experience or improve a bit of the UI, there's a lot of this context of UX is actually slowing us down. The problem why this appears is basically because you guys are working for outputs, okay? There's nothing specifically wrong for working for outputs. It pays the bills at the end of the month. But if you're just working to get that delivered until the end of the week, well, we're really just slowing you down because it's not about what you're delivering and the impact it has. And that's really the shift that we need to make usually. So it should be about making people's lives better. Yeah, should be about whenever you're delivering something, it's a service you're bringing to the world. Yeah, it should be about impacting people's lives and making that slightly better. Eventually, even putting happy faces on them. Yeah. So if you're not really driving for outcomes, it's always going to be difficult to get UX in there. Yeah. So bottom line, it doesn't really matter the amazing technology that you have and that you're building. If you don't get this seamless symbiosis between driver and the technology, you're not going to win any races. Yeah. So let me give you a few examples on why it is so important to get to know the users. I worked with a company a few years back, and they built the whole solution. So UX wasn't really in the picture. So they weren't talking really to users or anyone about the users. So they pushed out the solution. And after some time, they had a set of apps. And there was one app that had zero adoption. So at one point, they get the chance to go to the company, actually figure out what was happening. And when they went to the place where it was supposed to be adopted, and this was Africa, basically all the guys that worked there couldn't read or write. So they spent all this budget, all this money to develop a solution for people that couldn't read or write, so they couldn't actually use the application. Had they known this beforehand, maybe they could have done something different. Maybe they could create an application that could be used without read or writing. So, and a less extreme case. So this was a project for a major retail. So it was a performance evaluation system. We basically were supposed to just push out to everyone in the company. But of course, when I got there, the people that we were talking to were really the people at headquarters, not really the people across retail. So we pushed to go and meet these people that were supposed to also do this. And a lot of them were just, of course, working outside the headquarters. So we went to the supermarket and we kind of like tried to picture what was this environment in which people were working. And obviously there was like a very small room on the back which had the computers, which actually everyone shared. There was a single user and people just went there and did like the stock checks and requests and stuff like that. So by the point we got there, it was pretty obvious that the solution we were creating for performance management integrated with the login was just a mess and it would never work. The only reason we got that, and this one we got a bit earlier, was really about this push that we want to go where the target users of the application are, and really figure out what's that context in which they're bringing into the application. And that's the only way that we're going to create something that not only has a positive impact on people, but that has the return on the investment that companies are bringing into these applications. Last example, we're finding, for example, in this case, that there were an application, again, with adoption problems. So as we went into this place where it has its users, which was a car shop, so it was pretty obvious that the solution that we have, which was based on like blame IDs and stuff like that, wasn't really working. Why? The object in a car shop around everything, where everything revolves around, is what? It's the car. It's a license plate. So every time they needed to check on something, they need to go to check what's the claim ID, whatever, in some paper, to actually go to the system and check things out. When you're there, you can see just, okay, it's a license plate. Just use the license plate and just make it a lot easier. And suddenly, by removing these roadblocks and just making things work smoothly with the context that users have and how they approach these things, suddenly it becomes a lot easier to have an impact, have a positive impact. So when we're talking about user experience, sometimes we think a lot about the UI and stuff, but in the end, it's a lot deeper. It's about creating experiences for humans, okay? And I'm going to explain a bit more and spend a bit of time to explain then a bit what is this thing about building and designing for humans, yeah? So one important thing to know is that humans in particular, are always in energy saving mode. Yeah. So I think everyone experiences it whenever, okay, we're doing something and suddenly we need to pick up something across the house. So we're going to get any kind of excuse not to do that. So, or whenever we need to go like two blocks away, maybe I'll take the car. So we're always in this mindset, and it's really unconscious that we're always trying to save up energy. And I've been talking about this for a while, and I was basically thinking about there must be kind of like a principle or a universal law that kind of explains this idea that you need to consume less energy, or that we're always trying to consume less energy. And the interesting thing here is that I couldn't find like a principle or a law around the brain that we're basically hardwired to consume less energy, which kind of seemed impossible. And what I eventually found is that there is a principle, but that it applies to nature as a whole. So there's an universal law around this, which is basically animals, plants, humans, everyone's hardwired to save energy. Yeah. So what does this tell us? It tells us that whenever we're presenting an application or a system to a user, he's basically trying to save energy. Whenever we're doing stuff that consumes more energy, they're going to get tired. They're going to get frustrated. And eventually they won't adopt, or they'll boycott the system, or just speak awfully about the system to the colleague on the side. So an interesting thing here is how the brain tackles this challenge. Across the several generations that we've had, basically we developed a way to reduce energy. So this comes from a book, which is Thinking Fast and Slow, if you want to check it out. And basically there's a system 1 and a system 2 within our brain. System 1 is really fast, is basically detecting things and understanding what they are and making decisions. And system 2 is kind of like the heavy machinery. Is whenever you look at something that you don't understand, you activate system 2. And system 2 is the rationale part of the brain that's kind of like going to process things. Yeah. So a good example of this in use is, for example, when you're learning to drive a car. So when you're starting to drive a car, everything's new. There's so many things, controlling the traffic in the car and stuff like that. It's overwhelming. Yeah. So, and when you go through a lesson, you end it and you're like exhausted. Yeah. So that meant that system 2 was activated the whole time. Is that bad? Not necessarily. You're learning, right? But if people are always in system 2, they end up exhausted and they abandon whatever you're trying to push to them. Yeah. So what happens when you eventually start getting the hang of it? Okay. So basically what happens is that you start to create these mental patterns in your brain, yeah, these concepts, and it becomes transferable to system 1. So the system 1 is basically matching this against an existing concept and think, I know this, and this is the solution. So it starts to be a lot less energy, to a point where you can actually even move it to the background and just figure out what you need to buy to your mother-in-law for birthday or something like that. So this idea of energy is really fundamental, and it relates with the effort that we're forcing the user to make when it's looking into an interface, when he's trying to accomplish something in the real world and we're forcing him to use that application. And does it help him or not, or her? Okay, so we've seen in this perspective of consuming less effort, saving users energy, we've seen like an uptake of a set of apps which basically took the world by storm by just applying this idea that we need to be simpler. We need to spend less effort by the users. For example, in just a few years ago, whenever you needed a ride somewhere, you need to go through the whole process of finding a taxi, calling, identifying location, waiting for confirmation, waiting for a taxi. So there was a lot of process that consumed us, a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, yeah? And suddenly there's Uber that kind of like, you just pull up an app, it knows where you are, you say, I want to go here, and you click on button and the car appears. It's like the most extreme way of just getting to that place. Like it was the minimal path possible, the minimum set of clicks. And it just became a worldwide success. And this was all about this idea that you need to reduce effort for users. And if you bring that simplicity, they will make you successful. Now you might say, Gonçalo, bullshit. I work on really complex systems. These are really hard. There's no way that we can simplify this. Well, I really need to play the bullshit card there. Because SpaceX, and I'm sorry going back to Elon Musk, so the guy is special, but he has an amazing moments of genius. So SpaceX was able to revolutionize things where they went basically from the situation on the left, and that was the interface for the users. And eventually they came to a point where basically they transformed the whole interface into a touch screen, yeah? And they make things a lot simpler. Of course, they brought a lot of automation and makes it a lot easier as well. But that comes to show that when we have this drive where we're trying to add simplicity, it's not exclusive to just the B2C apps and the consumer apps. It can be applied to just about anything. Okay, so $1 million question. How do we simplify then? How do we get to this great experience? So for that, I'm going to kind of like bring into perspective. We're going to pick up on an interface and actually like decompose it by layers and see how the brain is actually processing an interface and why it gets simpler or gets more complex, okay? And we're going to start by the bottom layer, yeah? So what is the bottom layer? So the bottom layer is about the physical aspect, is about specific constraints and how we work as humans, yeah? And for that, I'm going to ask for your attention, yeah? Are you focused? Ready? So who saw the leopard? Okay. Okay, whoever didn't see the leopard still, according to Darwin, he shouldn't be here, yeah? So the thing is, through generations, we've been tuning this about detecting patterns and whatever breaks the pattern. And it's just the way that we've been geared because it's about our survival. So when we talk about that system 1 and system 2 is all about matching patterns. Whatever is like an equal pattern, whatever breaks the pattern. And you're making decisions out of this. For example, if I see the leopard, I'm going to kick in system 2 and figure out, okay, I should be doing something about this. Or maybe you don't activate system 2, you just run. Maybe that's the best thing. I probably would have died as well. Okay, so for example, so this is a way on how we're hardwired to process the world around us, yeah? So again, this came out of evolution through thousands and thousands of years, where maybe we regressed a bit in the last 50, but in the last, through these thousands of generations, they've shaped us to be these physical machines we are today and how our brain works today. So another example. So if you put your finger ahead of a page, and if you try or just put your finger ahead of your keyboard, yeah, and you try to focus the fingernail, and while focusing the fingernail, I want you to try to see the world around it. So if you try this, what you're going to find is that something that actually appears very clear, very sharp, when you're actually doing this and just focusing on that, what you realize is that we live in an unfocused world. I have news for you guys. So the brain is fooling you, yeah? So it's kind of like telling you that everything around you is every time in focus, but what happens is that you're moving your eyes really fast. But the point is, the place where you decide to look, the decision is made in an unfocused world, yeah? So that means that whatever's under there, the way that you structure things, the things that you put as calls to action, your buttons, your actions, the decisions are being made in a blurred world. Yeah, which means that they have to be a lot more structured, have a lot more contrast. We'll see a bit more of how we can tackle this. So I'm kind of throwing this to you. Don't get overwhelmed, because then the second part is about how can we actually then leverage this and make things better. Yeah. Okay. So another cool example. So this is a magazine, right? So that red box, does it belong to the article above or below? Above.
The one in the middle?
Yeah, the one in the middle. Yeah.
I would say the article above, number 2.
Exactly. So there's one thing that through the last century they discovered about our brain, which is there's a set of assumptions that are being made when we're presenting with information. They're called the Gestalt laws, and it's about how we correlate different objects that are displayed. So there's a set of them. One of them is around proximity. So we naturally, whenever something is closer together, we assume that it's part of the same group. So for example, we have the title just within that space, like number 3 and number 2. What about number 1? It's a different pattern. So does it belong to the one upstairs or to the one below? Upstairs. It's still, upstairs? Okay. It's discussable. Actually not that clear. Okay. But so there's this idea that, so the way that you put information into the screen, and that applies to newspapers and magazines, the way that you align things, the way that you group things, carries a lot of weight on how the brain is going to process it. So if things are messed up, the brain is going to take a lot more energy to make sense of stuff, like we did in the first one. It's like, okay, what belongs where, right? But if things are like in the right side, where things are closer together, suddenly it becomes a lot easier to understand what belongs to what. So that's another characteristic. But this is all brain-wise, right? We also have constraints on how we actually physically use stuff. So, for example, this is an example of people as they're trying, or a conceptual model of people trying to use the mobile. And there's areas of the phone which are easier to reach, and there's areas of the phone which are harder to reach. So whenever you have a common action, where do you think we should place it? The middle? Right in the middle, right? Yeah.
Common.
Sorry?
In the bottom. In the bottom of the screen.
In the bottom, yeah. So interesting enough, in the last iOS update, they changed the browser, and the URL started to be where? Really at the bottom of the screen, right? It becomes a lot easier.
The other way around.
Yeah. And it used to be the other way around.
When they were smaller, like in the beginning, like iPhone 5 and iPhone 4, used to be the other way around because it was the size of your hand perfectly. Exactly. In these days, they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly, not getting better.
So and you still hold it at the bottom of the phone, like not on the top. So
So this is just, as if you think about it, it's really just natural, right? So basically, what you're doing is reduce efforts to make the things a lot easier to use. Okay. So this was the first layer. So we're really working for the physical constraints, how the brain works, how the body works. The second layer, it's about conventions and about designing for user knowledge. And for that, I would like to run a test. So what is this on the screen?
It's an email address.
An email address, right? Do you think that came out of the evolution of people as they came
No. It wasn't here 200 years ago.
What about this one?
Phone number. No, credit card number, I would say.
Probably credit card. And this?
CTA, call to action, like a button to application.
What about this one? It's trickier.
This, I would say, an input on a form that it's mandatory.
Yeah. And this one?
An icon, an action, or maybe an app icon.
Yeah, probably an app icon, something like that. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Andre. So the lesson here is the same way that through generations we were shaped to be who we are today. The same way, since we were born, our life experiences have been creating what we could call our mental model of the world. So every time we're faced with something, especially things which are repeated, we are creating these mental patterns which make up our mental model. So the thing that's going to define, if things are easy or not for a given user, is basically if the mental pattern already exists in your brain or not. Yeah. So hold on to that. So when we're talking then about mental model, this can come at several levels. So one thing is something that we're all born with and kind of like been seeing journals, magazines, and stuff like that. It's kind of general knowledge. Then you kind of like move closer So maybe people here in the Western world about how we process information as a whole. And if you move closer to computers, suddenly if you talk to your parent, or if you compare yourself to your parents, clearly there's a set of mental patterns that you already have that they don't. And specifically, if you're building something, an application for a user, it's going to have a bit of a unique mental model that probably doesn't exist to other people. Our ability to actually figure out what are the mental patterns living inside the head of our users, in the end, is what's going to make something simpler to use or not. So, for example, any idea what this is? Yeah. So, thank you, Mike.
Yeah. It was good, but yeah, a heat map of a website, mouse tracking.
Exactly. So basically, we're using an eye tracker, and we're following the eye of the user, trying how it processes information. So this is a site in the Western world where things start from the top left. How would you think this pattern would look if it was like the Arab world? Exactly the opposite, right? So it comes to show that although we have a lot of shared patterns as we're growing up, the thing is that depending on the place and the context in which you emerge, the environment, you're actually processing information in different ways. Something that works for some users will not work for other users. Yeah? So we got to the second layer, we thought about like physical strengths, now users' knowledge that they gather and the mental patterns they create. We get to the third layer, which is about the functional part. So it's about addressing whatever the user is trying to accomplish. So, okay, we've been learning a lot about like the Gestalt laws, alignment, and grouping. So help me out. So what's wrong with this picture?
Well, I would say it's a mess because you have food and drinks in both sides. You don't know where to focus. Like if you want food, you don't know where to look at.
Exactly. It's really a mess, but it's not a mess. It's how we build applications. Everything's alphabetically ordered. Come on, it's easy to find. If you want
The title is not right. The title.
Soup, you just kind of like scan, and there it is. Yeah. What's wrong? Okay, so the thing is, what's wrong is that it's not really considering the context in which it's used, right? So we have a ritual that we follow on how we have our meals. So there's a starters and then a main course or a drink or a dessert, or your girlfriend that says she's not interested, just has a snack and then eats all the fries. So this is the way that you present information if you're aware of the context. Now, it's really easy for us to understand that this is a mistake. Why? Because we are the users in this case. It gets trickier when you're trying to develop something that's actually for someone which is not you. Okay? But this not only applies, and we've seen why, right? So if you kind of move across the world, suddenly you get faced with much different kind of menus, right? So it's not really the whole ritual and the procedure on how things were done suddenly changes completely on how they order food and what does a meal look like. Yeah. So again, really depends on who you're building things for. So if you try to create like more of a conceptual model around this, there's like 4 critical things that come into this functional layer. One of them is the user. And so who are these people that are supposed to do whatever you're trying to create? And this can be an application, a service, a bunch of things. So second thing is, okay, what are they trying to accomplish? Yeah. So what's their end goal? For example, what's the end goal of someone which is under the menu?
What's the end goal of someone that with the menu?
Yeah, what's the goal for someone in the menu?
Order the food, like have a meal.
Yeah, but that's a good point, but it's probably more of an output. It's a means to an end. What I want to do is get food, right? Yeah, and fill my belly. So it might actually be the case that the menu is not the best way for us to accomplish our outcomes. And us, as users of technology, are in the best place to actually find ways to achieve outcomes without having prescriptive outputs of how this should be done.
And just to add something to that point, it depends as well on the environment, as you said there. For instance, if I'm in Portugal, it's completely fine to have a menu just with text. But if I'm abroad, probably I don't know the dishes like that they use there. So a picture is very, very helpful to understand what I'm.
Clearly, the agents are a lot more into that one. Okay, so second one is about what we're trying to accomplish, and always the second question, which is why. Okay, why are these things happening? Why do you need these goals? Trying to uncover whatever's there. That's going to bring opportunities for us to create magic in the world. So next, it's about a task or a set of tasks of how do these people accomplish this thing? What do they need to do? What are the series of steps? What are the context in which that is appearing? Are there other users also involved in all of this? And last but not least, the whole environment in which this is happening. So depending on the environment, and this can be either, you're in Asia and you expect a given set of patterns, or it might just be that, well, I'm working all day with Excel, but then you force me to translate Excel to something else if I want to input information to the application. So it's about understanding what's their environment, or how we saw when we visited the car shop, it became obvious a license plate is the identifier, not anything else. So, and this kind of like wraps up kind of the challenges of the third layer around the functional aspect. So we build all these things. So there's a set of things that apply to any human, and then specifically for humans in a given space, and then specifically for the target audience of our application, and it kind of like gets specialized. And then there's something that you can add on top, yeah? So for that, I have an example. I haven't really tried it out, so it's kind of like, I'm a bit of an Apple fanboy as well, so let's just run with it. So this is like that the dynamic island from the latest iOS update. So, and basically, why is it engaging people so much? Why is it exciting? So one thing, why do you think it's? No, I'll just turn it around. Why is it creating this excitement, this delight? What's happening here? What are they bringing that excites people?
Well, as a designer, I think the execution is really well done. Although I know the reason why they are doing this is to hide the camera on the phone, because they haven't figured out yet a way to put it behind the screen.
Yeah, exactly. If you know management is the amazing turn a weakness into an opportunity, right?
Exactly. And that somehow annoys me a little bit to know that it was not something like annoys me the part that I know that it was not created to be this special thing. It was just like a workaround on the camera. But apart from that, like the interaction and like the spontaneously is kind of like it's Siri in a different level.
Yeah. So you touched on a few things which are really interesting. So for example, the first one you touched was craftsmanship. It's very well built. You kind of like feel seduced around the movement and the things of how things behave, right? So there's also a sense of novelty. It's like something that we never saw. And it's like, it's amazing. And then it's about stuff that you're using every day. So there's like, it seems like they're evolving the way that they're serving us. Yeah. So it's getting to that perfect fit for whatever we need, right, at any moment. So there's a set of characteristics going, although this session is not really about the light, although it can bring another level of simplicity. It's really about like, if you really go over the top, you can bring these things, novelty, craftsmanship, perfect fit. So we'll go into that more. So these are the 4 layers again. So physical, conventional, functional, and the light. And if you're actually building this up, okay, the way the brain works, how people work, how your users work, and you're basically going to get that simplicity. You're going to foster trust. So for example, would you leave your credit card in a site which is slightly broken? Well, if the front end is broken, what else is broken? I'm not going to put my credit card in there. So there's a whole aspect of trust about having things tidy, yeah? And if you have all of these things together, then there might be a spark for love just right there. Okay, so at some point, okay, so I don't think people left, so there's not that overwhelmed with the whole thing. So now I'm going to try to demystify, not that explain really about what user experience is about and the kind of things that you should get right to get to that simplicity. I'm going to kind of like tell you that you shouldn't wait for a UX designer to make it better. Yeah. So these are a set of practical guidelines on, for each one of the layers, how can you get to that good enough level? Okay. So first, the physical. So the first in the physical world, if you remember about the Gestalt laws, everything's aligned and consistent. So it's about using the same elements. Yeah. So if you look into the interface, it's like there's specific elements which are presented in a given way, and there's like they tend to be consistent throughout. The same tones of gray, the same type of font. So the fact that we're basically reusing more of the same elements in as they match up, right? So you shouldn't match up stuff which is completely different. It makes it a lot easier for the brain to process. So if you have the titles and you tend to have the titles always in the same way, the brain creates this pattern. Okay, this is how I expect the title. If it's keep changing, you're activating the system to make sense of whatever they're looking at. So for example, if a button for saving moves places between screen to screen, you're forcing the brain to figure out what happened and how do I react to this. So same thing, for example, navigation. You have that capitalized labels for navigation that are applied one place and the other. So it becomes, again, a pattern specific to this application that might force the user to stop at the beginning and figure out, okay, what's going on here? But if it creates the pattern, then it's more of the same. It becomes more and more comfortable to use. So that's the first one regarding just working, leveraging those patterns, yeah, bringing consistency. Second one is about making everything align with everything else in the page. So to be safe, nothing in the page should not be aligned with something else, yeah? So for example, here you see the segments and the drop down and kind of like that line. So everything's perfectly aligned, right? You have a line of filters, everything's perfectly aligned. You have like a set of labels there in that table and underneath, everything's perfectly aligned. So the key rule here, the thumb rule, is just to, whatever object you put on the screen, make sure it aligns with something else on the screen, okay? If you're doing this, you can't get too wrong. Another one is around, okay, we're talking about how to display information, being consistent. Now we're talking about contrast. So sometimes you want to lead the user. You want to break the pattern. You want to make it visible in a blurred world. What's the next step? So this is the place where you should be applying this contrast, trying to make the actions more obvious and the next step by step being guided for the user, yeah? And wrapping up this section, it's about following what we could call, or what's called a visual hierarchy, a clear visual hierarchy, and keeping symmetry. So the visual hierarchy, there's actually an underlying limitation of our brain. Our brain is very limited. So the way that we process information, we're able to tackle about 6 to 8 items at a time. So when you look at the screen, it's a lot, yeah? It's not 6 or 8. So what the brain does, it's kind of like, it starts like in a blurred world, it kind of segments the world apart and says, okay, there's this section, there's this section, there's this section, there's this section. The other, this column on the left, the content here, and the content on the bottom. And then he's going to make a decision, where do I focus? And then I'm going to focus in one of these clusters of objects. And there I'm going to analyze, okay, so 6 or 8 items, what do I have here? So it means that although it kind of seems like everything's plain, your brain is decomposing this into a visual hierarchy, yeah? And the rule here then is, for example, in terms of spacing is, the further along the clusters are, or the further to the top the clusters are, the more space they should be, okay? So again, you can break this. For example, Mike has permission to break all of these rules. But to be safe, whenever you're in the top clusters, things should be wider apart. And as you get closer and closer, as you get further and further into the clusters, they should become more, they should become closer. So spacing should reduce. And if you're doing this, you're going to help the brain process all of these things through the rules of proximity to process information. Yeah. Another thing I see a lot of times developers getting wrong is just symmetry. It's like, okay, it's like 10 pixels on the left and it's like 13, 14. It's the same on the right. And this affects the way that we also perceive balance, and it's also part of the Gestalt laws. So whenever you can, make sure that whatever you have on the left is the same margin you have on the right. Whatever you have in the top is the same thing you have in the bottom. Yeah. So if you're doing symmetry, again, you can't go too wrong. Okay. So just recapping. So working for how our brain works when we're building specifically here interfaces. So keep using the same elements, assuming they're kind of the same kind. Okay, make everything align with something else on the screen. Okay, everything should be aligned with some other object, not like hanging around. So 3, make whatever actions we have to make them clearer and contrasted from other things. And 4, the way that you kind of lay out the whole page, think about the visual hierarchy, like diminishing spaces and also keeping symmetry. Yeah. So if you're doing these things, you have the building blocks.
Yeah, no, just to about the consistency that you mentioned there. I read once a very funny article about it that it was comparing it to kids. So the reason why when we are playing with kids and like you do something funny and they say like, oh, one more time, is because they are new in the world. They don't know anything. So everything is new for them. They have to learn everything for the first time. And when you do something funny and they know that the expected outcome is that, they just want to keep do it because they enter in the first part of the brain that you mentioned before, the one that they know the outcome. So they don't have to spend so much energy on that.
Brain, right?
So they are like in auto mode, and that's the reason why they do that. And that's completely true on the on the experience as well.
Exactly. That's why I see Noddy 50 times in a row. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. That's a good point. The whole way that like children are training their brain. So, guys, so this is the physical part. So it's really like let's build interfaces that work for the brain, that work for everyone's brain across the world. Yeah. Okay. So, an important practice here as well. So remember, be tidy. Okay. So whatever you're doing, make sure that things align and are consistent. And a second recommendation here is that you won't be able to get tidy if, I'm not sure if this is complicated here in this room, but you need to learn CSS. Okay, you're not going to get tidy if you don't learn CSS. And CSS might not be considered a programming language, but it does have a set of particularities that you need to master, like inheritance and like, I forget about the whole terms about specificity and like the flex box and stuff like that. So there is like, I promise, it's like 5 to 10 major concepts that you need to really understand. If you know these things, you'll be able to master CSS. And if you master CSS, you'll be able to be tidy and work for your user's brain. Okay, moving on. So the conventional layer. So talking about or working for people's knowledge. So what's interesting about this thing, this button? So one of the things that actually is pretty obvious, but we don't really think about it, is that when people start to grow up, they're growing up in a physical world. Yeah. And then at some point, we introduce this virtual world, this digital world to people. It's completely foreign. It doesn't. The rules don't apply, right? In a room, you open the door and you come into the room, and you know where you are. You know how to get out again. If you go into the digital world, you get into a page. At some point, you're not even sure how you got there, right? So all the things and the cues that we have in the physical world often don't apply to the digital world. So you need to bring more of this physical reality to the interface to make things more comfortable. So the obvious thing is what happens when you touch on something in the real world. it reacts, right? Why don't things react when you touch them in a digital interface often? Yeah, it's just counterintuitive. Yeah, so same thing. So whenever something, if you were in the real world and something just appeared on your side, it would be really weird, right? But that happens all the time in the digital world. So things don't like kind of appear in a natural way. So we can actually bring a lot of the rules from the physical world and reality to the digital world, and that brings comfort. And actually even a degree of sophistication that shouldn't be the case. Yeah? So, another pop quiz, guys. So, what do you think is the orange box on the top left?
The one on the top
orange
left?
box on the top left. What is it, do you think?
Logo, company,
Yeah,
something
exactly.
around that.
Logo?
Title, maybe,
Yeah.
depending on if it's a table, but yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty accepted. So on the right, the red one.
Say call to action, like the action that you want to take.
Okay, menu. That's a weird choice for a menu.
Call to action, search,
Yeah,
maybe.
probably a set of things around account and search.
Yeah,
that could
actions.
be, like the purple one.
I would say filter, some kind of like
Yeah,
menu
depends on
or
what
filters
pages.
or
Yeah,
something like that.
filters
Or navigation.
yeah, and maybe navigation. And then we have like some site content on the yellow. So were we taught this at school? No.
No.
So
I would
what
say it comes from.
So did someone explain that to you?
No, I would say it comes from experience. Experience like using platforms and like some norms that were kind of like institutionalized. Yeah, same pattern over and over again, and you kind of like it create like a theme around like this should be here.
Exactly.
Kind of like the blue link
Yeah.
that you assume that it's a link from Google.
Exactly. True. So everyone uses Google, so kind of like everyone picked
The
it up,
blue link
right?
become.
There's an interesting story around also the asterisk for mandatory in the fields. That actually it's a well-known fact that like no one did that. It's kind of like started appearing and suddenly it was a convention for everyone. So no one took credit like I did this. Yeah. So no one knows where it came from.
There's a huge discussion around the hamburger menu that some people say like it's not the best way to symbolize menu, but it just become like the universal sound to symbol to the menu.
So actually I wanted to have a slide here which I don't have, which is about Jacob's law. So Jacob's law states that users will spend most of their time in other people's applications and websites. Yeah. So which means that if you want to basically create something which is conventional, you just copy other people. Yeah. So if you're copying and bringing patterns from other people, you're basically, you can't be that far off of creating something which is comfortable for your users. Yeah. So guys, keeping it not too long. So rule 1, so bring world mechanics and metaphors. So this is going to bring comfort to people. So find the common placements, visuals, labels, hamburger icons, and stuff like that that people across are using and just copy that. Yeah. So it's, again, like Picasso said, like great artists, what was it? Good artists copy and great artists steal. Yeah. So, but it's in the benefit of our users. We should be copying a lot of our application. And then there's like these 20% which make all the difference where the main use cases exist, we'll talk about. And these are the ones where you bring your innovation. Yeah. And fourth, which is the last but not least for sure, is if you're working for a given set of users, and there's a target audience, there's the people on that department, figure out what are their mental models. So what are their materials? How do they look at stuff? How do they represent a given object? Try to bring those representations and those patterns that they already have into the application. If you bring stuff that they already recognize from their world into the application, it's going to be theirs. Yeah. But you only know if you actually put yourselves, go out there and get that, get those examples. Okay, hint here. So all these things about getting consistent and bringing some of the things which are familiar is a great practice is having a design system. So not only a design system where you have Figma, where we're collecting all of these patterns. If you don't do this, I guarantee it, At one point, you'll have 7 types of drop-downs in your applications. So if you want to be consistent, okay, and really provide that quality feel, be sure to create a design system, yeah? And if you really want your design system to make a huge difference, extend it to code. If you have it extended to code and you're making it the easier way for developers to do their work, they get, not only do you get faster development, but you also get free quality, free accessibility. So there's a set of benefits that if things are done as this foundation, you get a lot of these benefits free as you go into projects, yeah? So major advice. So functional part, all about how do we design then for users. Yeah, 7 drop-downs, I hear you. Okay, again, same model. This is all about the functional part. Who are these people? What they're trying to accomplish? And how are they going about it in what context, right? So these are a set of questions that you might push out. Does it mean you don't need to be talking to the users, okay, if you can't, but at least bug someone that can say that, like, okay, what's their job? Working with whom? Like, what's the size of the team? Who comes in when? What does a typical day look like? This is an amazing question because whenever you're going to these research modes, there's always the known unknowns, things you don't know, and then the unknowns. There's stuff that you don't know that are going to bite you in the ass, but you have no idea. So one thing is kind of like open up and try to get them to share information without being directive, yeah? So for the goals, really understand what the success look like for that person. What's the end outcome? What they're trying to accomplish through that. Third one, tasks. So what are the common tasks, okay? One of the top mistakes done by developers when they get to requirements is that they get these 20 things that need to be there. Every one of them has the same importance. I guarantee you there's 20% of those requirements that get 80% of the benefits. Yeah? And this is where you should focus. Get the numbers, how often, how many. An interface which is designed to get 5 things is very different from one which is supposed to have 50 or 500. Yeah, so learn about the cardinality of elements, okay, the common cases, and then figure out, okay, what are the main challenges today? What are the obvious opportunities that we could be addressing? And then the environment, okay, where are you performing your tasks? What tools are used? And whatever we can. And behind all of these questions is like the why, okay? Why does this person have this job? Why do they get like 10 requests a day? Why? And through that, you'll find the opportunities to make a difference. So the 20-80%, like the Pareto rule here, is really important. Again, one of the top mistakes done by teams is that everything is important. And if everything is important, nothing is important. And there's one thing there. For example, Google does a lot of things. If you go to Google, what do you get? One thing. It's like the thing. If they just brought everything like Yahoo did, they would lose the race, right? So again, for example, why do we have a clock on the phone screen of a phone? Why isn't it an app?
It's the most used thing.
Yeah, it's basically they made a take of just replacing watches, for which they were very, very successful until they created one. So there's a whole strategy. Okay, guys, again, functional. Know who are the users? What are they trying to accomplish? Go beyond the outputs and to the outcomes. Figure out how they're going about it. How do they break down? What's the most important things? And learn about their environment and constraints. Things to consider. We work a lot with use cases and user stories. Consider job stories. So the job stories force you to kind of take a step back and take a step forward. It's about like, okay, why is someone doing that? And then what is he trying to accomplish by doing this? Yeah. And here I might be killed by some UXers, but I think you should be testing with other people which are not you, even if it's just your colleague. Yeah. Do it always just a few rules. Do it always one-on-one. Present a specific task and say, I'm not going to be able to help you. It's about just seeing if the application works. Do not help, okay, unless completely unavoidable and the guy's been suffering for 10 minutes. And then measure basically, like the major thing was the guy able to actually do the thing autonomously? And how many times did he did mistakes? How many times did he get confused? How many times did he ask for help? And this gives you an evaluation, a quantitative evaluation of how good the experience is getting in your application as it applies to a user. If you can do this with actually the target users, that's even better.
I have one question. I don't know if it's for now or for the end of the talk, but it's kind of like how do you recommend to put this setup in place? If it's just with the UX researchers, or if the development team should be involved as well. Maybe it's more like end of the conversation topic.
Yeah, maybe it's a longer conversation.
Yeah.
Hold on to that one. It's a good one. Okay. So another hint also for your developers out there. So think about having really a solid definition of ready and definition of done. And a lot of these things can fit into these common artifacts or common procedures in development. Definition of ready, sorry. Do we have a job story? Do we know why the user needs to accomplish this? Do we have sample data of how the user is going to approach this? And then, for example, definition of done. Is it being tidy? Is it following the design system? Have we done the usability test? Maybe. So consider using kind of like these gateways to make sure that whatever comes in, you have the context to do your best job, and whatever comes out is the quality that you want to make your users' lives easier. Okay, so last one, just to wrap it up. So the light, if you want to go the extra mile, create this perfect fit for the needs of your users. Okay, it's just there, it just works. Yeah, it takes a lot of work to make something simple. Make it optimized. Sometimes it's just like reduce or increase the performance, cut the time, come up with like these relevant solutions to users' challenges, leverage your knowledge of technology. Like Craftsman, maybe that's the end. So craftsmanship, relentless attention to detail. So if you want to really create the light, every pixel, every kind of movement counts. And the last is novelty, and you need to be on top of trends, innovations in your area and whatever domain you're working on. Bring these new ideas in and try to surprise your users. In the end, it's all about outcomes. Yeah. So it's not about pushing experiences out the door. It's really about we push something out. Did people adopt it? Are they able to be successful with it? So one of the easiest ways to do this is just whatever you push out there, get some analytics, okay? And figure out what are those moments of truth that tell you that someone adopted it or that they're being successful. Okay. Now it might be a point where it kind of feels like a lot of work, right? And it is a lot of work getting to users, testing these things and getting to this level of detail. And that's often because that's why it makes all the difference to have a mic in the team, yeah? People that can really worry about these things, that they bring their training and art to push things further, yeah? So basically, UXers are going to apply a whole design process, starting from the problem and trying to get to a solution, figuring out what are the different opportunities out there, what are possible solutions, and they'll be working side by side with developers, which is exactly the kind of thing that makes Tesla and other companies really, really successful. Yeah, and that's it. Damn, 1 hour.
Okay, well, going back to that topic that I've put before, try to explain it a little bit better. So for the context, for the ones that don't know, I'm a product designer. So I'm on the other side from I'm Mike. Okay. Hi everyone. Well, first of all, amazing talk. Thanks a lot. Very insightful. My question is more around as a product designer, like there's always like this kind of distinguish between like the product team and the dev team. They are one thing in my vision, but there is like the kind of like split the tasks between them. And although like designers try to do research and all that stuff. Sometimes then when it gets to implementation, like things are not exactly like they plan or like they thought it was. My question is more like, should we involve developers on the research part as well, as they are the part where they are like understanding the problem and trying to come up with a solution together?
We definitely should involve developers in some of the things we're doing. I think one of the most transforming experiences that I've seen is actually getting development teams to see usability tests. So see someone trying to use what they created. And it's a very humbling experience. And you can actually really play it like a soccer game. It's like you set up like a set of usability tests and you just stream something to a faraway room, because there's going to be a lot of laughs. It's going to be really an exciting thing because people are trying to use, and I assure you, there's will be a lot of failing. They're going to try to use your software, and the things that you created is basically not going to work, and they'll do the most amazing things, and they'll say the wildest things in the process as well. It's an amazing experience. Actually, there's a technique from Steve Krug around usability tests, which is to basically get food into a room where usability tests are being run, and people will just come by to get the food and the drinks, and they'll just watch a few usability tests. And it's kind of like a guerrilla thing to actually get that perspective in there.
No, that's good. That's great. Yeah, I really think that there should be like a more connection between those those two, because then like they are end up developing the same thing. So so they need to participate. That it's not like I guess my point was more like, it's not just the user restrictions or requirements. Then you have like the development requirement as well.
Exactly.
What can be implemented, what cannot. So bringing those two together help a lot to.
There's an interesting sentence, I think it's from Jared Bool, which is, so the industry tends to call assumptions requirements.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of our role as well. So we got these requirements, and there's nothing like kind of taking a step back, talking to users, and kind of see what they tell us about that. And often we'll learn about stuff which is interesting. Sometimes it kind of feels like it's like the first slides. It slows down.
Yeah.
But if you're actually working for the users and getting their context in other ways you're increasing impact. But it's a tough balance.
Yeah. And when talking about research, do you encourage like to do like not just like design research in a way, like to build a prototype in Figma or something like that, or to do like some small applications to test stuff before they go out? Like, should everything happen like on the space that is not past the development yet, or should be like in and out?
Yeah. So developers tend to be a very valuable resource, right? So there's a lot of reasons why. So one of the best ways is for us not to waste their time. So you can't be doing like A/B testing and just getting feedback and then iterating, but you're doing it in the most expensive way. So one of the benefits of having more design and the ability to build prototypes is really that you can shorten that feedback loop. And if you actually learn something that doesn't work before you actually implement it, you're saving time and you're saving money. So in the end, it is a prototype, and it's not going to give you the results that a live software is going to provide. But it will increase confidence, and if you're really wrong, it's going to tell you. So I don't think there's an optimal answer. It's really about like, how confident are you that you're solving the problems? What's the risk? But it always pays off to try to iterate through the prototype instead of iterating through code. Sometimes it's also easier to iterate through code. If you have 1 million users coming in every day, sometimes it's just easier to get an A/B test and see what works best. Yeah. But it really depends also then in B2B, B2C scenarios. So fortunately, no recipe, but yeah, feedback loops are good. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, thanks a lot. I don't know if Rui has some question.
I had a question, but I think you guys kind of answered it already, because I heard you talk a lot about research and getting closer to the user and see how the user will actually use your software or your system, your interface. And I was thinking, how should we approach this? Are we going to do like this huge research effort upfront, and now we know everything about how the user intends to use our system. Then we can go about designing an interface and a design system and all of that, or is it more of an iterative process that we put something out there and then we try to observe how the user interacts with it, and then we refine it, we iterate over it? So hearing you guys discussing it kind of answered my question, which I guess I already knew the answer before asking the question anyway.
But regarding this is common. Like, so do we need to do this like upfront research every time and spend all this time and effort? No, not at all. And it comes down to one thing, which is team confidence. So you have a team that should be multidisciplinary. They should be joining around the problems that they intend to solve. And looking at the problem and the potential solution, how confident is the team that this is going to solve it? If the confidence is high, there's no point in doing like loads of research up front. You might not even need to do a prototype. It's kind of more of the same. It's the same user, same application, same domain. We know these things. We've been doing it for 2 years. So we just push it out and just see if it works. Or come get the software version, then just tune it before launching or something like that. In other cases, it's new personas, new domain, new type of application. You're going to get it wrong.
And that's where the research will give you the most benefit,
exactly.
Right? When you know
at least gives you a wall where to build the ladder, right?
Have you been, this makes another question pop up in my mind. Have you been in a situation where you do believe that you know the context, that you have trust about what you want to push out, and then you put it out, and then you have this scenario where you got it all wrong and you were basing it on a lot of assumptions that turned out to be wrong? Like this type of war stories, I would be interested on hearing if you've ever been there.
Yeah, what comes to mind is something when I was not really at the point where I was challenging requirements. So things just came to me, and I did the best I could to actually create usability on that solution. And I tested that with people if they were able to use it. But in the end, it was the wrong problem being solved. So, and there's no fix for that in terms of usability. So I think if I remember one case where that was really obvious is this thing that I didn't challenge the requirements and actually check if, okay, does this make sense? And in the end, if you're solving the wrong problem, there's no solution for that. Yeah, I think it's really that.
It's not a problem, there's not a solution.
Yeah. Any questions there?
I don't think so. It was clear as water.
Okay.
Gonçalo, thank you so much for joining us and for this amazing session. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Cheers.